Old Grognard says, let's look at how multi-class characters work in 2nd edition AD&D. Hello, and welcome back to Old Grognard Says. Multi-classing is something that has changed from edition to edition, so if you're jumping backwards in editions from a more modern game, how they do it in 2nd edition might seem a little bit strange. Regardless, I'm going to do my best to explain how this works. When we make a multi-class character, there are a few of what we could look at as ground rules. The first one is that if the character is going to be multi-class, they have to start with this option at the time of character creation, level 1, or more accurately, level 1-1, or even 1-1-1. If you're making a higher level character, you still create them as if they were multi-class from the beginning. The second one is that only non-humans can be multi-class. Humans can instead be dual class, but that's a thing deserving of its own video, and for now, let's just stick to how multi-class characters work. The third is that the combination of character classes you can choose at the time of character creation is dependent on your character's race, and that once you choose, the character is locked in as that combination of character classes. So, for example, if you start out as a thief mage, you stay a thief mage and can't add any new character classes later on. There's a list of allowed character classes that's sorted by character race on page 44 of the PHB. This is sort of like the default, but it can vary from setting to setting. For example, if you look at Dark Sun, the multi-class combination list just for elves has more combinations than all of the PC races combined in the PHB. Again, if you have questions, ask your DM. Now that we know some ground rules for making multi-class characters, how does this work in play? On page 44 of the PHB, it tells us how this works in a section titled Multi-Class Benefits and Restrictions. Let's look at what that says. The first sentence tells us, a multi-class character always uses the most favorable combat value and the best saving throw from his different classes. What this means is that as the character advances, they use the Thac0 and Saving throws for whichever of their classes is the most beneficial. If we look at the Thief Mage from earlier, they would have a 20 Thac0 at first level, but as they advance and gain levels, their Thac0 from their Thief class will be better than the one from their Mage class. So they'll use the Thac0 from their Thief class as they go up in levels. If we look at their saving throws, they would look like this. The saving throw table on page 101 tells us what the saving throws are for our character. The Thief class uses the Rogue table, and this is what rogues level 1 through 4 have. The Mage uses the Wizard table, and this is what the saving throws are for a wizard levels 1 through 5. In 2nd edition, the lower the saving throw number, the better, so we take the lower of the two for each category. For our poison, paralyzation, and death magic save, we use the 13 from our Thief class. For Rod, Staff, Wand, we use the 11 from our Wizard class, and for Petrification Polymorph, we use the 12 from the Thief class. For Breath Weapon, we use the 15 from Wizard, and Spell, we also take the Wizard save, and we get a 12. The next thing the book talks about are hit points, and it says this. The character's hit points are the average of all his hit dice rolls. When the character is first created, the player rolls hit points for each class separately, totals them up, then divides by the number of dice rolled, round fractions down. Any Constitution bonus is then added to the character's hit points. If one of the character's classes is Fighter and he has a Constitution of 17 or 18, then he gains the +3 or +4 Constitution bonus available only to warriors, instead of the +2 maximum available to other character classes. So at first level, your hit points are the average of what your hit points would be for each class rounded down, and then you add your con bonus. This works the same way if you're using the house rule where you have maximum hit points at first level. So our Thief Mage would take the max HP from Thief, which would be 6, and the max from Mage, which would be 4, add them together for 10 and divide by 2 since we have two classes, and would have 5 hit points plus whatever they get from their Constitution. The PHB goes on to explain how this works as you gain levels in the next paragraph. Later, the character is likely to gain levels in different classes at different times. When this happens, roll the appropriate hit dice and divide the result by the number of classes the character has. Round fractions down, but a hit die never yields less than 1 hit point. The character's Constitution bonus is split between his classes, thus a Fighter Mage gets 1/2 of his con bonus when he goes up a level as a fighter, and the other half of the con bonus when he goes up a level as a mage. A Fighter Mage Thief would get 1/3 of his bonus when he goes up as a fighter, 1/3 when he goes up as a mage, and the other third when he goes up as a thief. Because experience is divided equally between the character's classes, our Thief Mage will become a second level thief before they become a second level mage. So when we get to the point where we have a level 2/1 Thief Mage, we would roll the d6 for our Thief class and divide by 2, rounding down but getting at least 1 hit point. We then add that to our hit points. If we had a Constitution bonus, we would get half of it on top of whatever we got from our hit dice roll. But what if we divide up our hit points from our con bonus and don't get an even number? What I mean is, for example, let's say our Thief Mage has a 15 Constitution. They would get +1 hit point per level. How we handle this is that rather than dividing it in half or something like that, where we get half a hit point when we level up, we pick one of our character classes to assign that bonus to. In my experience, we usually assign it to the class with the highest hit die, but that's not universal. So if you did it this way, you would get the +1 hit point from your con whenever your thief class goes up a level. If you had something more extreme, like, say, a dwarf fighter psionicist in Dark Sun with a 21 Constitution, your Constitution-based hit points would be 5 per level. How you would handle this is that you would get 3 hit points from your con when you went up a level as a fighter, and the other 2 when your psionicist class goes up, instead of 2.5 with each class. Hopefully this makes sense, and if it doesn't, feel free to ask questions in the comments. The next paragraph talks about proficiencies and starting money, and this is what it says. If the optional proficiency system is used, the character starts with the largest number of proficiency slots of the different classes. Thereafter, he gains new proficiency slots at the fastest of the given rates. To determine the character's initial money, roll according to the most generous of the character's different classes. To figure out the thing about proficiency slots, we need to look at Table 34 in the PHB, which is on page 50. So for our Thief Mage, we look at starting weapon proficiencies, and because the Thief starts with 2 versus the Mage is 1, we start with 2 weapon proficiencies. As we go up in levels, we get our weapon proficiencies from our Thief class, since it has a better progression at one slot every 4 levels versus the one every 6 for the Wizard. For non-weapon proficiencies, we start with 4 from our Mage class, since that's better than the 3 we would get from being a Thief. And the Wizard gaining 1 every 3 is better than the Thief's 1 every 4. So we use our Wizard class to determine when we get more non-weapon proficiencies. The text doesn't say anything about the non-proficiency penalty, but we take the better of the two for that as well. If we look at starting money, the Rogue starting money is better than the Wizard starting money. So we use the Rogue starting money of 2d6 times 10 gold pieces. If we jump past the example they use at the bottom of the page and go to the next part of the text, it talks about the restrictions multi-class characters have on their abilities. Multi-class characters can combine abilities from their different classes with the following restrictions. Warrior. A multi-class warrior can use all of his abilities without restriction. The warrior abilities form the base for other character classes. What this means is that if your character is a fighter slash whatever, your character is basically considered to be a fighter with extra abilities. Now, it says you can use the abilities without restriction, but if you look at the description of the fighter class, it will say that only single class fighters can use weapon specialization. So this is normally interpreted to mean that multi-class characters can't use weapon specialization, but there's a chance your DM might feel differently about that, so again, check with your DM. Next, we have the priest classes, and it says, Priest. Regardless of his other classes, a multi-class priest must abide by the weapon restrictions of his mythos. Thus, a fighter cleric can use only bludgeoning weapons, but he uses the warrior combat value. He retains all his normal priest abilities. What this means is that your mythos limits what weapons you can use, as explained above with the fighter cleric. It is possible, if your character is a half-elf, to be a fighter druid, and in that case, you can choose from the druid weapons, but your mythos limits your armor and shield choices. Again, ask the DM if you have questions. Let's move on to wizards and thieves. Wizard. A multi-classed wizard can freely combine the powers of the wizard with any other class allowed, although the wearing of armor is restricted. Elves wearing elven chain can cast spells in armor, as magic is part of the nature of elves. However, elven chain is extremely rare and can never be purchased. It must be given, found, or won. Thief. A multi-classed thief cannot use any thieving abilities other than open locks or detect noise if he is wearing armor that is normally not allowed to thieves. He must remove his gauntlets to open locks and his helmet to detect noise. With both of these, we see that there really aren't any restrictions other than those that are based on what kind of armor you're wearing. This is also what you see if you have Psionicist as part of your multi-class setup. If you're playing Dark Sun or some other setting, you'll have some combinations that you don't have in the base game. These rules still form the framework for how you multi-class, even if you're playing a Ranger Druid multi-class or something like that. The last bit I'm going to talk about is how experience points work and how that relates to level draining. When a multi-class character is awarded XP, they divide the XP evenly between their 2 or 3 classes. That's the basic rule of thumb. If you want to add the 10% bonus for ability scores to each total, you can do it that way. It doesn't really say much else about how to do XP beyond that. Again, You're going to hear me say the thing I say about most things second edition. If you have questions, ask your DM. Level draining, if you encounter it, works like this. The character loses a level in whichever of their classes is the highest. If they're all the same level, they lose a level in the class that took the most XP to get. As with single class characters, when a level is drained, the XP total for that class is reduced to midway between what it takes to gain that level and the next. So, for example, if our Thief Mage from earlier has 5,000 XP in each class, they would be a level 4 Thief and a level 3 Mage. If an energy draining attack drops them by one level, they would now be level 3 Thief and level 3 Mage, and their XP total for the Thief class would be 3,750, or in other words, halfway between what they needed to get from level 3 to level 4. If they were drained of yet another level, they would lose a level in their Mage class and also be reduced to 3,750 in that class. If you have any questions, ask your DM. If you are the DM, you can ask questions here in the comments. If I don't answer, someone else probably will. I have one house rule for multi-class characters I'd like to share before ending the video. I've always felt that the thing where multi-class characters average their hit dice and round down gave them the short end of the stick when it came to hit points. How I like to handle this instead is to do it the way you do everything else with multi-class characters. That is, you use whichever class has the best version of the thing in question. So how this works with hit dice and hit points is that you get your hit points from your class with the highest hit dice. So if you're a fighter mage, for example, you get your hit dice and hit points from your fighter class. No averaging, no rounding. You just get more hit points when you gain fighter levels. With this rule, a single class fighter will still have more hit points than a multi-class one of the same XP, but it's just easier to figure out and thematically goes along with how everything else works with multi-class characters. That is, you take the best version of whatever the thing is from among your different character classes. Again, this is a house rule, so you can take it or leave it. I found this picture while I was digging around for images to use in this video. It doesn't have anything to do with multi-class characters, but I thought it was pretty cool, and I feel like a lot of the early art in D&D was made by people drawing their own versions of pulp magazine art like this. Anyways, thanks for watching, and have yourself a wonderful rest of your day.